Good morning and welcome to today's Hacker News Daily. I'm your host, and we've got an absolutely fascinating mix of stories for you from yesterday's front page. We reviewed 30 top stories and picked the 5 that really captured the community's attention. And wow, did these spark some debates. We're diving into everything from the fundamental nature of human attention and connection to major shakeups in the tech acquisition world, to Europe's latest salvo in the AI wars. We've got philosophical discussions about loneliness, heated debates about blockchain's real purpose, and some serious drama in the browser space. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's explore what had the Hacker News community fired up yesterday. Story 1. Almost anything you give sustained attention to will begin to loop on itself. Let's kick things off with something that really caught my eye on Hacker News. Almost anything you give sustained attention to will begin to loop on itself. This one sparked quite the conversation, with over 600 points and 175 comments. And honestly, once you hear what it's about, you'll understand why people couldn't stop talking about it. So here's the fascinating thing. It takes a pretty bold approach to explaining how our brains work with attention. The author uses, sex as the primary example to demonstrate this neurological phenomenon, which definitely raised some eyebrows in the comments. But stick with me here because the science behind it is actually really compelling. The core idea is that when you give something, anything really, your sustained focused attention, your brain creates this feedback loop that intensifies the experience. It's not just about focus in the productivity sense we usually talk about in tech circles. It's about how attention literally changes the quality of your reality. The author explains there's this whole cascade of dopamine activity happening. And here's where it gets interesting. Dopamine isn't actually about pleasure itself, it's about the anticipation of pleasure. When you slow down and really focus on something, you're creating these phasic bursts of dopamine that pull more receptors to the surface of your neurons, making you hypersensitized to whatever you're experiencing. Think about it. Have you ever listened to a song on repeat until it became almost transcendent, or stared at a piece of code so long that suddenly the solution just clicked in this really satisfying way? That's this loop in action. The author argues that our modern attention economy, with its constant notifications and context switching, might be robbing us of these deeply pleasurable, almost psychedelic experiences that come from sustained focus. What really struck me in the discussion was how people connected this to their own experiences. Several commenters brought up meditation, particularly something called jhanas, which are these altered states you can achieve through sustained attention alone. No substances required. One person described achieving visual effects similar to psychedelics just through focused meditation. Another fascinating thread developed around how different languages conceptualize attention. Like in Spanish, you lend attention, while in Chinese, you literally place your heart on something. But here's where the conversation got really nuanced. This attention loop isn't always positive. Multiple commenters with OCD pointed out that this same mechanism can trap you in cycles of anxiety or intrusive thoughts. One person described it perfectly. My brain latches on to the smallest inconsistency and won't let go. It's like the same neurological machinery that can make a sunset breathtakingly beautiful can also turn a worried thought into an all-consuming spiral. There was this interesting debate about whether paying attention to anxiety makes it worse or better. Most people agreed it amplifies it, but one commenter made this compelling counterargument that really observing anxiety, like truly sitting with it, can actually be liberating because you realize it's just another experience, not some fundamental truth about reality. Now, I've got to mention, one commenter thought the whole article read like it was written in a manic state, which, fair point, the writing style is definitely intense, but honestly, that almost adds to the meta quality of the piece, right? An article about sustained attention that demands sustained attention to fully grasp. The technical explanation involves multiple brain systems all working together. Your dopaminergic pathways, various hormones that need time to build up and be absorbed, working memory that needs to be cleared and reloaded. It's this complex dance of biological processes that modern life just doesn't give time for. We're so used to quick hits of stimulation that we've forgotten what it's like to let these systems fully engage. What I find most provocative about this whole discussion is how it challenges both our productivity culture and our instant gratification culture simultaneously. It's not saying focus more to get more done, and it's not saying relax and enjoy the moment in some simple mindfulness way. It's suggesting that there's this whole dimension of experience we're missing out on because we never give anything enough sustained attention to let it loop on itself and become, well, as the author puts it, vivid, strange, and hot. The comments section had people sharing all sorts of examples, from programming entering flow states to artists describing how a painting reveals itself through sustained observation, to someone talking about how learning a musical instrument creates these feedback loops where suddenly everything clicks. It really makes you wonder what we're sacrificing in our constantly interrupted, notification-driven world. Not just productivity or peace of mind, but actual intensity of experience. And then there's the whole website design controversy. Oh boy, the site uses this scrolling animation that some people absolutely loved, calling it innovative, immersive, beautiful. But others, they were literally getting headaches. One person said it was completely inaccessible. Another called it designer narcissism. It's wild how divisive a scrolling mechanism can be. But I guess that's the risk you take when you try something different with data visualization. What really got me thinking, though, was this point about selection bias. Someone pointed out, and they're absolutely right, that the kind of person who volunteers to have a recorded conversation with a stranger for research is probably already pretty agreeable. The grumpy people, the introverts, the folks who would rather eat glass than make small talk, they're not signing up for this study. So when we look at these results showing how positive these interactions are, we've got to wonder, is talking to strangers actually great? Or are we just measuring the experiences of people who already think talking to strangers is great? There's also this fascinating ethical dimension that came up. We've got 1,500 people's conversations now digitized, analyzed, potentially being used to train AI systems. Even with consent and anonymization, it raises questions like what happens when we can train an AI on thousands of hours of real human conversation? Are we creating better chatbots, or are we somehow commodifying human connection itself? The contrast between online and offline interaction kept coming up too. Multiple people noted how face-to-face conversations tend to be so much more civil than what we see online. One commenter put it perfectly. They said when you're looking someone in the eye, all that performative aggression just melts away. You're not performing for an audience anymore. You're just two people trying to understand each other. You know what's kind of beautiful about this whole thing? In an era where we're all worried about AI replacing human interaction, where we're building increasingly sophisticated systems to simulate conversation, here's a project that's essentially saying, hey, you know what's still amazing? Two actual humans sitting down and talking. And 900 plus people on Hacker News, a community that's usually all about the latest tech, found that compelling enough to upvote and discuss for hours. The interactive format itself is worth talking about from a technical perspective. This isn't just dumping data on a page. It's crafted storytelling through user experience. You're not reading about a conversation, you're experiencing its flow, its rhythm, its awkward pauses, and sudden connections. Whether you love or hate the scrolling animation, you've got to admit it's trying to do something different with how we present conversational data. It makes me wonder what would happen if we all just tried this. Tomorrow, strike up a real conversation with someone you don't know. Not small talk about the weather, but an actual conversation. Based on this data, biased sample or not, odds are it'll be better than you expect. Now, from human conversations to financial transactions, let's dive into something that's got the Hacker News crowd absolutely fired up. Stripe just announced they're launching their own blockchain called Tempo. And folks, this isn't just another crypto project from some startup. This is Stripe, the payments giant that pretty much powers half the internet's transactions, deciding they need to build their own layer 1 blockchain from scratch. So here's what's fascinating about this whole thing. Tempo isn't trying to be the next Ethereum or Solana where you can build whatever decentralized app you dream up. No, this is laser-focused on one thing: payments. They're claiming over 100,000 transactions per second with near zero fees, which, if true, that's genuinely impressive. But what really caught my eye is the guest list for this party. We're talking Anthropic, OpenAI, Deutsche Bank, Visa, Shopify. It's like someone threw a mixer for Silicon Valley tech companies and traditional banks, and somehow everyone showed up. Now, the Hacker News discussion on this is where things get really spicy. With 700 comments, you know people have opinions, and boy, do they. The main debate basically boils down to this: why on earth does Stripe need a blockchain for this? Like, seriously, couldn't they just spin up a Postgres SQL database and call it a day? One commenter put it pretty bluntly: if you control all the validators and it's essentially a permissioned system, what's the difference between this and just a regular database with extra steps? But here's where it gets interesting. Patrick Collison himself, or at least someone claiming to be him, jumped into the thread to defend the project. He's saying, look, real companies like SpaceX and DollarApp are actually using stablecoins for legitimate business reasons. They're not speculating, they're not trying to get rich quick. They genuinely find these tools better for certain use cases than traditional banking rails. And that's actually a pretty compelling argument when you think about it. The cynics in the thread, and there are many, are suggesting this is all about regulatory arbitrage. Basically, stablecoins let you do bank-like things without being regulated like a bank. One user did some napkin math and figured out that if Stripe captures deposits like other stablecoin issuers, they could be looking at $1 billion annually just from the interest on the float. 4% on deposits when you're handling massive volumes, that's real money. What I find really telling is the divide in the comments between people who've actually worked with international payments and those who haven't. The folks who've dealt with cross-border transactions, especially in emerging markets, seem more sympathetic to what Stripe's trying to do here. They're like, you try sending money from the US to Nigeria through traditional banking, and then tell me blockchain doesn't solve real problems. But then you've got the database engineers who are just exasperated. They're pointing out that everything Stripe's promising, the speed, the low fees, the instant finality, you can absolutely achieve that with a well-designed centralized system. And they're not wrong. The technical capabilities aren't the revolutionary part here. I think what's really happening is that Stripe's betting on stablecoins becoming a legitimate parallel financial system, not replacing traditional banking, but running alongside it. And if that's the future, then controlling your own blockchain infrastructure instead of relying on Ethereum or Solana, that starts to make strategic sense. It's like Amazon building AWS instead of just renting servers from someone else. The involvement of companies like Anthropic and OpenAI is particularly intriguing. Why do AI companies care about payment infrastructure? Well, if you're thinking about AI agents that need to transact autonomously, suddenly having programmable money on a fast, cheap blockchain becomes pretty relevant. Maybe Stripe's thinking several moves ahead here. One commenter made a point that really stuck with me. They said, this feels like the oracleification of blockchain. Taking this supposedly decentralized, revolutionary technology and turning it into enterprise software that looks suspiciously like the centralized systems it was supposed to replace. And yeah, that's kind of exactly what this is, isn't it? The thing is, maybe that's not necessarily bad. If blockchain's killer app turns out to be databases, but with better marketing and fewer regulatory constraints, and that actually helps real businesses move money more efficiently, is that a failure or just a different kind of success than the crypto anarchists originally envisioned? What really comes through in these 700 comments is that we're watching the blockchain space mature in real time, and not everyone's happy about what maturity looks like. It looks like partnerships with Deutsche Bank, it looks like compliance and KYC, it looks like Stripe, a very centralized company, running a decentralized network where they probably control most of the validators. And yeah, that's kind of exactly what this is, isn't it? The optimists see this as blockchain finally growing up and solving real problems. The pessimists see this as blockchain selling out and becoming everything it swore to destroy. And honestly, they might both be right. Next up is another big tech announcement. Atlassian is acquiring the browser company for a whopping $610 million in cash. And let me tell you, the Hacker News crowd is not happy about this one. So here's what's going down. The browser company, these are the folks behind Arc, that beautifully designed browser that power users absolutely love, they're getting bought by Atlassian. You know, the company behind Jira, Confluence, all those enterprise tools. And if you're scratching your head wondering what on earth Atlassian wants with a consumer browser company, yeah, you're not alone. The community is basically having a collective, wait, what? Moment. The timing of this is particularly brutal for Arc users. See, just recently, the browser company announced they were essentially putting Arc on maintenance mode to chase this new AI-powered browser called Dia. They literally told their most passionate users, the ones who've been evangelizing Arc to everyone who'd listen, that they were moving on to build something else. And now, boom, acquisition. It feels like, imagine if your favorite indie band suddenly said, we're not making rock music anymore, we're doing EDM now, and then immediately sold out to a major label. That's the vibe here. The discussion thread has over 400 comments, and the sentiment is overwhelmingly negative. People are calling this everything from a strategic misstep to an overpriced acqui-hire. One commenter put it pretty bluntly. They're saying this is basically $610 million for what amounts to a chromium skin with some AI bolted on. Ouch. But here's what really gets me about this whole situation. The browser company had something special with Arc. They had users who genuinely loved their product, not just liked it, but were passionate advocates for it. These are the kinds of users most companies would kill for. And instead of doubling down on that success, they pivoted to chase the AI hype train with Dia, alienating their core user base in a process. Now, there is one interesting perspective in the comments that caught my attention. A user named Drewbeck actually sees some potential here. They're arguing that Arc could work as this middleware layer between all the different SaaS tools that businesses use every day. Think about it. You've got Slack, Jira, Google Workspace, all these different platforms, and Arc could potentially be the glue that brings them together in a more seamless workflow. That's actually not the worst idea I've heard for an Atlassian acquisition. But most people aren't buying it. The general consensus is that this feels like a mismatch. Atlassian is all about B2B enterprise software. They sell to companies, not consumers. And Arc, despite having some power user features, is fundamentally a consumer product. The fear, and honestly, it's probably justified based on tech acquisition history, is that Atlassian will either kill these products or try to force them into some enterprise box that they don't belong. The price tag is another sticking point. $610 million in cash. That's serious money, even in tech acquisition terms. Though, interestingly, one commenter pointed out that in the current AI acquisition market, this might actually be on the lower end. They compared it to Instagram going for $1 billion back in 2012, or more recently, Windsurf getting acquired for $2.4 billion. Still, for a company that many see as having abandoned its successful product to chase trends, it feels excessive. What really comes through in the discussion is this sense of betrayal from the Arc community. These users feel like they were sold a vision of the future of browsing, they bought into it, they promoted it, and then the company just walked away. One commenter mentioned they'd been recommending Arc to everyone, and now they feel foolish. That's rough. The whole thing raises bigger questions about the state of innovation in the browser space. Are we so locked into the Chromium monopoly that even innovative browser companies can't find sustainable business models? Is the only exit strategy to get acquired by a bigger company that probably doesn't even want your product, just your talent? Because that's what this feels like to a lot of people. An acqui-hire dressed up as a strategic acquisition. I'll be honest, I'm skeptical about where this goes. Atlassian's track record with acquisitions is mixed at best, and the cultural fit here seems questionable. Arc was built by designers who obsessed over every pixel, every interaction. Atlassian makes, well, Jira. If you've used Jira, you know what I mean. These are very different product philosophies. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Atlassian has some grand vision we're not seeing yet. Maybe they'll surprise us all and actually do something innovative with Arc and Dia. But based on the community reaction and the history of these kinds of acquisitions, I wouldn't hold my breath. This feels like another case of a promising independent product getting absorbed into the enterprise software blob, never to be seen again in any recognizable form. Now, the Hacker News discussion around this is fascinating because it really splits into two camps. You've got people who are genuinely impressed with what Mistral's shipping. One user named Beryl actually reports getting way better performance from Mistral than GPT models in their production workloads, which that goes against the conventional wisdom. But then you've got this whole other thread of discussion about whether a European AI company can actually compete on the global stage. There's this particularly spicy take from a user called Pembroke, who basically argues that Europe's structural issues, the way pension funds work, the regulatory environment, the whole ecosystem, means Mistral is doomed to only succeed through what they call forced enterprise adoption rather than actually being better. They're essentially saying European enterprises will use it because it's European and compliant, not because it's good. Ouch. But here's what I find really interesting about the technical implementation. These MCP connectors are apparently remote only, which raised some eyebrows in the comments. People are wondering how you're supposed to connect to local resources if everything has to go through remote connectors. There's also some confusion about the security claims. Mistral says these connectors are secure, but folks are questioning what that actually means in practice when you're piping enterprise data through an AI assistant. The memories feature is clever too. They're not just storing everything you tell it. They claim to have this careful and reliable memory handling that automatically filters out sensitive information or stuff that's just temporary. So if you tell it your coffee order, it'll remember that. But if you accidentally paste an API key, it supposedly knows not to store that. Though I'd love to see how well that actually works in practice. What really stands out to me is the timing and strategy here. Mistral clearly going after the enterprise market that might be hesitant about using American AI services. They're offering EU compliance, they're undercutting everyone on price by making it free, and they're removing the friction of switching by letting you import your ChatGPT memories. It's like they looked at every barrier to adoption and just decided to bulldoze through them all at once. The community reaction is mixed, but telling. Yes, people generally agree that Mistral's models aren't quite at the GPT-4 or Claude level for complex reasoning tasks, but there's also this acknowledgement that for a lot of business use cases, you don't need the absolute cutting edge. You need something that's good enough, reliable, compliant with your regulations, and preferably not bleeding you dry on API costs. One interesting thread in the discussion is about whether this aggressive free tier is sustainable. Like, are they just burning venture capital to gain market share, or is there a real business model here? The consensus seems to be that they're betting on enterprise contracts. Give away the consumer product, get people hooked, then sell premium features and support to businesses who need guarantees and SLAs. The Mistral ChatGPT memory import feature, though, that's just chef's kiss levels of competitive positioning. It's basically saying, we know you've already invested time training ChatGPT on your preferences, and we respect that enough to let you bring it with you. That's the kind of user-friendly move you don't often see in the enterprise software space. There's also this undercurrent in the discussion about what this means for the broader AI landscape. If Mistral can make this work, if they can build a sustainable business on open source models with aggressive free tiers and European compliance, it could change the whole dynamic of the AI market. Right now, it feels like OpenAI and Anthropic are in this race to AGI while charging premium prices along the way. Mistral's saying, maybe we don't need to win the AI race. Maybe we just need to be good enough for real work. And that's a wrap on yesterday's top stories from Hacker News. What a ride, right? We started with the nature of attention itself, how sustained focus can transform any experience into something profound, for better or worse. Then we explored what happens when you put two strangers in a room for 30 minutes. Turns out magic can happen when we actually talk to each other face to face. We watched Stripe potentially transform blockchain from a revolutionary technology into, well, enterprise software that works. We witnessed the Arc community's heartbreak as their beloved browser got absorbed into the Atlassian empire. And finally, we saw Mistral making aggressive moves to challenge the AI establishment with free features and European sensibilities. What strikes me about all these stories is they're really about the same thing: the tension between human connection and technological efficiency, between innovation and consolidation, between what we dream technology could be and what it actually becomes when it meets the real world. These were the 5 stories that rose to the top from 30 major discussions on Hacker News yesterday, each one sparking hundreds of passionate comments, debates, and occasionally some genuine insights about where we're headed as an industry and as a society. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into yesterday's top Hacker News stories, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. Until then, keep questioning, keep building, and maybe strike up a conversation with a stranger. You never know where it might lead. This has been your Hacker News Daily. I'll see you tomorrow.